When we speak, one of the most important things is what words we put emphasis on and how we say them. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. There's a big difference between if I told you, yeah, you're a really good guitar player, versus, yeah, you're a really good guitar player. It's much different. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how we can take some concepts that we use in the language and speaking and apply them to our guitar solos to make them sound better really quickly. The first concept we're going to take a look at is changing the accents of your phrases. So I'm going to show you an example of just a little tiny phrase and how it changes the sound of it if we accent different notes in the phrase. So here's the phrase that we're going to look at. Now, just that alone, in the way that I played it at first, I kind of accented the first note, and then I kind of accented the second to last note. So, but what if I experimented with changing the accents around? So now I'm not going to accent the first note. I'm going to accent the second note, and I'm going to accent the last note. Or what if I accent the third note instead? So just that concept of changing the accents, even in a pretty small phrase, can make a huge difference. Let's take an even smaller, more simple phrase. So I can accent, there's actually 5 different notes in that phrase. So just accenting one of the notes in that phrase, I can already make 5 different versions. So I'm going to accent the first note. Now I'm going to accent the second note, the third note, now the fourth note, and now the last note. And that's just if we accent one note out of those 5 notes. What if we tried 2 different notes? So I'm going to accent the first note and the fourth note. Now the first note and the second note. Or the first note and the last note. So just implementing that simple concept alone with little tiny phrases is going to start to make even the stuff that you already play all the time that you're used to playing and you might think is kind of boring or repetitive, it's going to start to make it sound a lot more interesting. So let's try one more phrase and see what we can come up with by changing the accents. So that phrase there has 7 different notes in it. So just off the bat, we can make 7 different versions of that phrase by just accenting one of the notes and changing which note gets accented. So what happens if we accent, let's say, the third note? Or the fourth note? Or just the last note? The first note and the last note? So mess around with that idea and change the accents on all the stuff that you're playing. Now, one more thing that is really, really good to practice is actually playing a constant stream of eighth notes and changing which eighth notes get accented. So this is actually one thing that's really important to practice with just one note at first, because it's going to be easier to change the accents because you're not worrying about changing strings. On the guitar, when you change strings, sometimes there's a propensity for you to accent the notes that you're changing strings to. So for example, even on that phrase I just played, when I switch strings there to the second string, it's more likely that I'm going to want to accent that note. It's just a natural tendency, and there's no way to totally get rid of that and have 100% control over the accent and be thinking about all this stuff all the time. But if we just practice one note playing constant eighth notes, we can come up with some really cool stuff. So I'm just going to play a tempo like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now I'm going to start changing the accents. This is the kind of thing that drummers actually think about all the time, and one of the reasons that I started working on this in my playing was actually I checked out this book called Progressive Syncopation for the Modern Drummer. Super cool book, and actually if you do some of the exercises from that on guitar, it's really going to help you. So the last idea that I'm going to show you is to change the length of the last note in your phrases. So I'm going to play a few different phrases, and I'm going to play them 2 times, and I want you to listen to the difference between when I end on a short note and when I end on a long note. I think it has a really, really big effect on how the phrase sounds. So it almost gives actually this question and answer type of vibe to it. When you leave the note hanging and let it ring out at the end, it kind of leaves you wondering like what's gonna happen. And then once you end with that short note, it's like having a period. Boom, the phrase is over, and now I'm moving on to something else. Even though necessarily you don't have to play something else, you can repeat the same phrase, but it just gives more of a sense of finality because you stopped playing, whereas when you hold out the note at the end, it just keeps going and you still hear the sound of the guitar. Now I'm gonna try this idea playing a few different phrases, but I'm gonna make sure that I'm ending with a short note on one of them, and then the next one I'm gonna end on a long note, and I'm gonna kind of alternate. So, as you can see again, when I end on that super short note, it sounds like really final, it sounds like a period, whereas when I leave that note hanging, it leaves you kind of wanting to hear more. One other thing that's gonna really improve your soloing is if you can hear what you play before you play it. So if you wanna learn how to start connecting your ears to the guitar, then check out this video. And until next time, listen, learn, and jam.